Thanks, Niall. Okay, so very nice to be with whoever you are. It's as I was saying to Niall before, it's slightly strange not being able to see anybody and not seeing any reaction in anybody's faces, or even know if you're looking or eating your breakfast or whatever. But anyway, a big welcome. It's very impressive that so many people are turning out on a Sunday morning so near Christmas. So I'm revisiting this talk, themes that I've been thinking about for a long time, and many of which came out in a book called The Good Life, which was a few years old now. And I think actually the themes are more relevant than ever. I start with this quote, which is a theoretic, I think it, anyway, wherever I got it from, said it was the Buddha who said it. In separateness lies the world's great misery, and in compassion lies the world's true strength. And it's one of the key themes of my talk is going to be the importance of connection and interconnection, which it gives rise to more likelihood of altruism as opposed to individualism. And we'll think about that. But here's a few seconds of of some babies. Now, I'm guessing that if you're watching this, because I can't see any faces, that you might be going gooey and broody, you might not, you might think it's all sentimental. But what is it that gives rise to these little babies with the capacity to reach out to the other, to comfort, to receive and give comfort, etc.? And I think the field of psychotherapy is, like so many fields in human nature, given this is a day on human nature, is riven with splits, with tribalism, and I think one of the kind of historical splits has been that psychoanalysis has historically been seen as focusing a lot on the negative, on aggression, on destructiveness, etc. And I think possibly the transpersonal and humanistic therapists, and again, I have no idea. I mean, maybe somebody can do a poll while we're mid-flow, see what kind of therapists we've got here. But transpersonal humanistic therapists, possibly, certainly the way I was trained initially. I was trained initially as an integrative humanistic therapist and then trained as a psychoanalytic therapist, and I really try to integrate them. But maybe those traditions can be a little bit too positive, maybe too nicey-nicey, maybe fearful of what Anna Alvarez called staring evil in the eye. And I think we live in a world in which possibly we've been hoodwinked by a primarily neoliberal, possibly capitalist, and certainly a false Darwinist, not a real Darwinist view of human nature, which suggests that we're primarily selfish. And so, of course, Richard Dawkins in The Selfish Gene wrote, "If you wish, as I do, to build a society in which individuals cooperate generously and unselfishly towards a common good, you can expect little help from from biological nature. Let us try to teach generosity and altruism because we are born selfish." I actually think he's completely wrong, not completely wrong, but in many ways wrong. And I'll try to say why. Although we can teach compassion and altruism, and there's lots of very interesting evidence and research out there. This slightly more pithy quote, "Scratch an altruist and watch a hypocrite bleed." Again, it's easy to like quotes like that. They're kind of slightly funny, but actually, again, I think I think that they're only a part of the truth. So what is it that gives rise to things like this? You probably remember this from a few years ago. So as you see, there's a baby there at the top. There he goes. Amazing. Now, I'd ask for a round of applause if we were actually in the room together. But what drives that kind of thing? And there might be all kinds of things. It might be the glory, but there's something that drives humans to look after and care for and reach out to others in trouble. And I suspect, again, I'm not sure if this poll will be done, but I suspect most people here are therapists and get drawn to helping others. And we might want to think about why that is, even in toddlers. And I'll show you more of this a bit later on, but here is a very classic example of a toddler being helped.
It's a strawberry. See the strawberry. Oh.
He pretends to drop it, and the little kid picks it up to be helpful. So what drives those things, and how come we're capable of that and capable of extreme, amazing selfless altruism, but also we're capable of psychopathy, we're capable of, callous, unemotional, psychopathic activity. And I tend to think of psychopathy as on a spectrum, and we all have a bit of it. But we all know, I work a lot with forensic cases these days with perpetrators, and I've worked in the past with many traumatized people, and I do see the goodness often gets kind of never quite developed or gets pushed out of them, and often this changes through therapy. I don't see many psychopaths in therapy because they don't come unless they're trying to kind of trick the prisons or something, because you have to be motivated to change. But this group are very hard to change, and they can do the most horrendous things. And people, if you've read people like Bob Hare or John Ronson's book, or read about people like Ted Bundy, there's a great film about Ted Bundy, one of the most notorious psychopaths. They're capable of doing extraordinary, what you could only call it evil, really. And so why is that? How come this is the same species that are capable of doing all of these things? We often see in them a kind of cold aggression. So they'll often use aggression in cold, calculated, targeted ways. Sometimes they can read minds incredibly well, but this is not empathy. This is much more, I'm going to work out what they're thinking, feeling, so I can manipulate them. So some of the kids who are aggressive in this way are sometimes called happy victimizers. And like people who have reactive aggression, which I'll mention in passing in a moment, when somebody sort of hits you or says something, we react. This kind of cold aggression is much more scary. It's the sort of thing that can make your, if I had hair, make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. It can make you feel a bit cold to be in the presence of some of these people. And of course, there's degrees of psychopathy. We might want to think about, Bob Hare, in fact, I think said it, slight digression, if I digress too much, I hope Niall will butt in and tell me to stop, otherwise I won't get through. But Bob Hare said that actually the majority of psychopaths, that there's more psychopaths in certain professions, and you won't be surprised that heads of large corporations, in special armed forces, some politicians you might think of, and actually surgeons as well. And probably we all would like a surgeon who isn't too kind of, who can work under huge pressure and isn't going to be too empathic and worry about blood and stuff like that. But cold aggression is worrying, and it is part of human nature as opposed to kind of reactive aggression. So if I often work with kids and they lash out, and often the ones that lash out, actually, they're more hopeful because they've got an idea that things shouldn't be like this. I tend to think of these forms of aggression, I'm not going to spend much time on this thing, as central aspects of human nature. So you might think about, say, the cat snarling when threatened, as opposed to the cat when it's hunting for a bird. And we all have both of these capacities, but they can be out of balance in some people. So what I'm interested in is thinking about different kinds of altruism, and I'll be thinking more after the break about why, what might turn on or turn off altruistic capacities. I'm going to be thinking particularly in this bit about what Daniel Batson, who I think is a really, really good researcher in this field, has called empathically induced altruism. That wish to help other people who are in need out of genuine concern and for their well-being. So in empathically induced altruism, obviously you experience empathy and you help others regardless of gains for ourselves. So that guy who's climbing in France, saving that baby, he might have been doing it because he couldn't help himself. And we might think something similar of firefighters and people rescuing people who are drowning, but sometimes there might be ulterior motives. But Batson's done brilliant work showing, and I can only refer you to the book, how there is this thing called empathically induced altruism. And there are different kinds of altruism, which I'm going to mention briefly now in passing. So there's reciprocal altruism, which is what most evolutionary thought had suggested exists primarily. So historically, a lot of evolutionary thinking hasn't really believed very much in what Batson calls empathically induced altruism. So this is more, I'll scratch your back if you'll scratch mine. It's the sort of thing. So I was thinking a couple of years ago, my friend of mine moved into a house, and a friend of mine was in a house, and then new neighbours moved in 2 doors up, and they thought they'd take a bottle of wine round to wish them hello. It's the sort of thing you do with your neighbours. You swap keys and you help each other out. But actually, it's a reciprocal process. It's not because you love them or anything like that. And interestingly, on that occasion, my friend came back and said, they're only staying a few months. I wish I hadn't got such a nice bottle of wine. So that wasn't genuine, open-hearted altruism. That was more reciprocal altruism, if you like. There's other kinds of altruism, which I think many of us in this room can sometimes have too much of, which is what you often see in ambivalent, anxious, ambivalent attachment, when you really have to. So one of my theories, which again I won't go into today, is that many therapists got their main training in their families of origin when they were very young and had to look after parents who were a bit fragile. And so you might see a kind of compulsive caregiving, if you like. And so I'm looking after you, not because I really care from the bottom of my heart, because actually my life would be much better if you were okay. So it's a different kind of thing. So I'm just going through a few different kinds of altruism. A related kind is when you can't bear somebody's distress. So you're upset about something, so I'll let you have whatever you want in order to shut you up. That's because I can't bear your distress. That's not because I really care. So it's a different kind of altruism, right? Then there's the kind of doing the right thing for kind of moral reasons. And again, I'm not primarily focusing on this today, but it exists. And this is a great, actually, bit of research by, I can't remember her name, was it Gregory Bateson's daughter, who's was at least in the University of Newcastle. And she did this great research on, so I'm sure everybody in this, I'm talking about you're trying to convince myself that we're in a room together, which is what I would love. So I'm sure everybody here once, I don't know, lived in communal houses or was at university or college or whatever. And there was never enough money in the kitty. And so what she did is she put whatever the kitty thing was, where you put the money, on a shelf, and above the shelf for 1 week or 2 weeks, she put a picture of beautiful flowers. And for the next week, she put pictures of 2 eyes. And the period when there was just the picture of 2 eyes, in other words, conscience, guilt, superego, psychoanalysts would say, much more money. I think probably 3 or 4 times more money went into the kitty. So we all have this expectation that we're being looked at and doing the right thing because we're being looked at. Again, it doesn't necessarily come from empathy. It comes from following rules and a fear of being disapproved of and a fear of punishment, which is a big driver, but it's not the altruism that I think is the most important form of altruism. Just to go over some of the research, they did some great studies where, for example, they got people to do a test in which it was possible to cheat. And some of the people being tested were told to read the 10 Commandments just before, and others were told to read just a passage from a random book. And those who read the 10 Commandments were much, much less likely to cheat. So this is the kind of technique that people are using in things like priming, which governments use, for example, which is kind of nudging us unconsciously to do certain things. Again, you might think whether that's altruism or not, whether that's real, and it's all part of the human moral fabric, but it's not quite what I'm talking about today. And of course, we do also get rewards from helping people. The neuroscience is clear. When we do something that we feel good about, like helping a stranger, all kinds of reward circuits. This is old research. There's much more new research. All kinds of reward circuits fire up in our brains. Certain areas of the brain involved in reward circuitry light up when we see video game players rewarded for high scores by see their money going to charity, which is the same parts of the brain that fires up when we see others winning at the game. So when the money goes to charity, we get a reward. We feel good when good things are happening in the world. So again, but you might think, well, that's an ulterior motive. That's not. So there is lots of this research which suggests that there are reward circuits that fire. This is the same stuff as the previous slide. So our reward circuits fire when we do good things, but one of the interesting things that Batson found in his empathically induced altruism research is that even when that people do this without any reward, including the kind of the brain rewards that we just saw. So here, this is just, so that gives us a bit of hope in human nature. This is very different to the psychopaths, the Ted Bundys of this world. And after the break, what I'm going to come to is thinking more about how the kind of parenting we receive and the kind of culture and society and context in which we live really shifts our capacities for altruism or not. So what do we need in order to be altruistic in the way that I'm describing? We need some understanding of our own and other people's minds. So we need some capacity for autobiographical memory, for empathy. We need to be able to defer gratification. So I'm putting aside my needs for a moment to help you, which means some form of self-regulation. These are all frontal lobe capacities. Well, not only, but you know, the prefrontal cortex areas within the prefrontal cortex are central to all these things. Those are the brain regions that are particularly helped by good parenting and good psychotherapy, of course, and things like mindfulness, linked with things like executive functions, and they tend to develop together in good experiences, in good relationships. And these are things that get turned off by stress and trauma. So a lot of this stuff has deep evolutionary roots. So and there's a book that's critiquing a little bit of this that's just come out, but I think very few would argue that a lot of our evolution took place in small hunter-gatherer groups where we lived small bands, where it was really important that we trusted each other, that we relied on each other, that we worked together, that we weren't too selfish. It's a guy called Christopher Boheme, I think Boheme, who's written a lot about this stuff and pulled together hundreds, if not more, of anthropological studies, finding that just about all of the cultures studied, they were very close-knit, and loyalty and being good to other people in the group were really, really, really central for survival. And of course, if you're living in a small hunter-gatherer group and you get expelled from the group, ostracism, then you know that could well give rise to death. So you can see how why it's always historically been really important in our evolutionary past, what Bowlby would call our environment of evolutionary adaptiveness, our EEA, why it would be so important to be trustworthy, to be reasonably generous, to be thinking of other people, not putting yourself too first. That wasn't a world in which rampant individualism could survive. And this could happen through all kinds of techniques, so kind of moral censoring, through shaming, which we actually has a very bad press in psychotherapy. It's a really central way, so kind of like light teasing when people went out of line, that some of us know from our childhood or even from our adult life can be quite enjoyable as well, but was really not a kind of shame for who you are at the depth of your being, but a bit of light shaming, or even sometimes a bit heavier shaming, making people feel bad about what they do. It's a central trait. But it's all about facilitating close bonds which aided survival and thriving of such small communities. And what we know is that people can be then very, very dramatically punished when things go wrong. And that's still a big trait. We see it all the time. We see it in the news all the time. This is a few moments of after the Second World War, where French women who had sexual relationships with Nazis had their heads shaven and were shamed publicly.
Who sit outside their cafes watching the Allied armor roll by on the road to Paris.
Maybe this isn't the bit.
French flags from London rooftops. First electrifying news that Paris is about to fall numbs everyone by the speed of its sudden announcement. Though a big question mark hangs over Paris, the victory bells of St. Paul's Cathedral chime out. The eagerly awaited news of Paris's liberation is in everyone's mind. Cautiously awaiting developments, undemonstrative Londoners reserve their energy for final victory.
Oh, well. The bit with the shaved heads isn't there, but we know that it happens. We know it happens in all cultures, and we know how much shaming goes on. And we know that people don't speak like that on the BBC anymore. So here's another clip from a TV program, and I can't remember it, and I should reference it, especially if this is on video later on. Ostracism, being ostracized is one of the most painful things, as we saw in that clip. In fact, it fires similar brain circuitry to when you feel physical pain. So it's really important.
Virgil is struggling. He doesn't have his friend's skill.
Basically, they're going to share.
And Vulcan is getting impatient.
I won't leave that. I'm going to move on but there's plenty of examples of rats and primates, other monkeys, etc., chimpanzees, apes, sharing and helping each other. But it's different level of altruism. And we do have this moral sense, which might well come from our early evolutionary history. And it starts really early. So this is work from the research. I mean, Paul Bloom popularized this, but this was work by people like Kylie Hamlin, where they showed these very early moral capacities or moral insights or moral drives, I think, in infants.
Guy trying to get up a hill.
Sometimes the red circle is helped up the hill by a blue square, and when it reaches the top, it dances with joy. Then the infants see the circle try to get up the hill again, only this time there's a new player. When the circle works its way up, the triangle bumps it back down. The researchers then test how these 9-month-old infants interpret what they've just seen.
An experimenter who did not see which character was which brings over the two characters to the babies and just sees which character the baby touches first.
Which one do you want?
We found that, impressively actually, almost 100% of babies in a number of different studies preferred the more positive character.
So babies prefer good people who do good things. And they changed the colours, they changed the experimenter. The experimenter didn't know which one was the goodie and the baddie, etc. And they've even found this at 3 months old.
Addison is just 3 months old. In another experiment, she watches Stripe Puppet play ball with Green Shirt Puppet. When they're done, Green Shirt returns the ball. But when Stripe Puppet plays with Red Shirt, Red just takes the ball. After the show, Addison spends more time paying attention to the good puppet.
We weren't necessarily expecting to find as strong of responses as we have found at such young ages.
So at 3 months, they want to be with the one who did the good thing, but it's got its limits, because this moral sense also has a capacity for punishing and not liking people who do bad things. And this starts really, really young. So look at this.
Wesley watches as the puppet in the center struggles to open up a box with a toy inside. The puppy in the yellow shirt comes over and lends a hand. Then the scene repeats itself, but this time the puppy in the blue shirt comes and slams the box shut. Nice behavior? Mean behavior, at least to our eyes. But is that how a 5-month-old sees it? And does he have a preference?
Wesley, do you remember these guys from the show?
To find out, a researcher who doesn't know which puppet was nice and which was mean offers Wesley a choice.
Who do you like?
He can't answer, but he can reach.
That one.
Wesley chose the good guy, and he wasn't alone.
That one?
So again, they choose the good one, theoretically the good one. Then look at this, which is the same scenario.
They showed babies like James here a puppet behaving badly. Instead of rolling the ball back to the puppet in the middle, this green-shirted bunny keeps the other puppet's ball and runs away.
So the green shirt one is now back.
Then
right?
James is shown a second show. This time, the bunny, who we just saw steal the ball, tries to open up the box to get the toy. Will James still prefer the puppet who helps out? Or will he now prefer the one who slams the box shut?
Who do you like?
He chose the one who slammed it shut, as did 81% of babies tested.
So I just think that's mind-blowing. So what you're seeing here is that, if you understood it, is that actually in the same scenario, first time round, we prefer the one who was nice and opened the box. In the second scenario, the person who's trying to open the box had done a bad thing, and even the babies want to punish that person and prefer the person who slammed it shut. So we've got this kind of innate, I think it's very hard to argue that that isn't a kind of innate moral sense, although I do think it can get knocked out of you, or there are big links with what happens in terms of our early parenting and attachment style and the context and how safe we feel. And again, those are things I'll come to after the break. Before that, I just want to think about, what does this mean? Because one of the things it means is that we live in a world of in-groups and out-groups. We live in a world of social media echo chambers. We know vaxxers hate the anti-vaxxers, vice versa. You know, if you think about what happened with Donald Trump and social media, etc., that we're living in an increasingly scary world where it's quite hard to be open, curious, and have debates. And of course, we have to feel safe to be open and curious and have a debate. Let's have a look at this little clip.
Selected a group of people who had two important traits. They were all women, and they were all white. We told them we were testing how well people understand stories by making them listen to one by a woman named Natasha. Your goal is to listen to the story as quickly as you can, but also still understand Natasha's emotions by the end of it.
So basically, they have to listen to a story, and they can fast forward the tape if they want. It's the same story in the same voice, but some people listening have a picture of Natasha as a black woman, and some people have a picture of Natasha as a white woman. And let's move it on a bit.
An average of 3 minutes and 3 seconds longer when they thought she was the same race. And that was more or less the same for both groups. They all showed more empathy to Natasha when she was part of their group. And they did it without even realizing it.
She's good people. And she's a lot like me.
Natasha was an African-American woman. Do you think it would have changed how you listened to the story at all?
You might assume that this person has had an upbringing that's like yours. And so you kind of want to find those things in their story that you can relate to.
So this is really important because there is a natural tendency to like people like us, whatever that means, and to be distrustful or fearful or suspicious of people who aren't like us. And then it's very hard to show empathy and compassion and care for people who are different. And there's so much kind of actually vile, vicious, nasty stuff out there against anti-vaxxers or people who are pro-vax or whatever it is, and very little capacity to reach out and find any compassion or care or empathy for them. So actually all the stuff around trans stuff is really, really scary at the moment. And this stuff might be being upped by Russian bots in our social media. We just don't know. But whether you believe there's a great reset or whether you think that's a mad conspiracy theory, if you believe one, you won't be very inclined to open up and listen to people who think the opposite. So it's a scary time at the moment, I think. And empathy and altruism can be very limited. So it's got its limits. So for example, you don't want a judge to give a lenient or harsh sentence depending on whether or not the person who's being tried is like them or not in the same culture, class, ethnicity, etc. You don't want them to be favoritism in the housing list so that people in my family get up the list rather than others. So there are limits to empathically induced altruism, but I think that what we need to be doing as a culture and society in the world is opening up an increasing field of objects or people with whom we might feel empathy. And the world has changed very hopefully, I think, in many ways. Just think what it was like to be gay 40, 50 years ago. I work at the Pullman Clinic, and I saw somebody who's now in his 80s, saw him privately, who was at the Pullman Clinic in the 1970s. And his ticket of entry was homosexuality, which was seen as a psychiatric disorder. So things do change, but we've got a lot of internal work to do to open up. So, and we can train, you know, I was speaking to Niall before about the compassion Compassionate Mind listserv, this was a bit of research that was up there the other day, showing the effectiveness of training people in compassion skills. And it changes areas of the brain. And there's lots of research showing that we can train ourselves to widen our field of compassion. But it's hard emotional work and it doesn't come naturally. Here's my final clip, I think, before the break,
Going to start the experiment. What you're going to see is a bunch of pictures of different people. Your job is just to react naturally to those pictures.
Lasana is looking at activity in the brain areas involved in human social interaction. In particular, the medial prefrontal cortex. This comes online when we think about other people. It's less active when dealing with something inanimate, like a cup. What Lasana found is that this region has a similarly low response when we deal with certain types of other people.
What he sees now are stereotypical images of people from different social groups. What we see here is that this network of brain regions, including medial prefrontal cortex, is less active when our participant looks at the homeless people. So what this pattern of activity suggests is a type of mental avoidance. They are not thinking about the mind of the homeless person in the same way they thought about the mind of the college students that they saw or the business people.
So you might see something similar in unconscious racism or disdain for politicians of a particular hue, or people from a different social class, or people who support a different football team, or whatever it is. The more empathic, altruistic parts of the brain will turn off when we demarcate people as in an out group as opposed to an in group. And the emotional work is in trying to open up our levels of compassion, and that includes us as therapists when we're working with complex cases. And I won't have time to go into this now because it's very important we have a 5-minute coffee break. But what I've seen time and time again, and I'll see if we have time either in the questions or in the second half, it is how often when clients, patients, kids, adults, I've found, come in doing pretty nasty things and with quite vicious enactments in their play or whatever, after a period of therapy in which they feel more cared for, thought about, and feel more at ease, relaxed in their nervous systems, that begins to shift and change in quite dramatic ways. So this has been an introduction to my take on altruism. I'll be thinking a bit in the break, after the break, about its links with, for example, attachment theory. But for now, we have 5 minutes for a coffee break. And I've got one question for you, which is, does coffee enhance altruism? And the answer is yes, for me, because it makes me happier and it makes me act nicer, and it also enhances brain cells, I think. So I suppose one of the main theses I have, I'm showing an imaginary video panel, so I'm imagining you there. You're like I have no idea what gender you all are or anything, but anyway, so what we all know from any of us who are working with people in any way or just from human life is that when there's danger, we contract, we turn in, we atomize. There's this thing called the cell danger response, which I think is a really interesting theory about the mitochondria, these organelles that are in all of our cells, have their own DNA, etc. But what we know is that they're always in biology have been taught to be the kind of powerhouse of the cell, the source of energy. But when there's a danger, which could be a toxin or a virus, dare I say, or a bacterial or trauma, they will then stop producing energy and they will signal danger, and communication between cells stops. And we see this with bacteria. In the face of danger, they shut down, and we see less cooperation, less synchrony, less harmony, more polarization, more individualism, more atomization. In other words, feeling safe gives rise to the likelihood of openness towards another, and so of altruism. Actually, Porges describes this in terms of the social engagement system as well, central to that, what he calls the ventral vagus system, which I know is a little bit controversial these days. So here is a clip of a little kid, very simple little clip.
There's something inside. Can you see what's inside the box? You can take the lid off. Is there something in there?
Happy little kid boy, I think, playing, exploring,
Green cone.
smiling.
Put it back inside of the box. And put the lid back on the box. Look at this.
See the experimenter in the top right-hand corner there.
There.
Then somebody they call an emoter enters.
Hi, Teresa. I'm going to sit here and read a magazine.
Okay. That's Kelly.
Most of these clips are easily accessible on YouTube, by the way. He's looking like you should do at strangers, safe or not.
Look at this.
That's aggravating. That's so annoying.
Oh, I thought it was really interesting.
Well, that's just your opinion. It's aggravating.
What's your own feelings, guys?
Yeah.
Is he going to play now? No? Too scared, numbing down, not in her presence. Quite painful to watch even those few minutes with a very happy, healthy little kid. Something about fear that closes us down inevitably. Now, this links, I think, to the whole issue of attachment. That what has been found is that secure attachment, which we know depends on receiving attuned, empathic, containing attention, is likely to give rise to more altruistic and prosocial behaviours. So with security comes an ease, comes trust, openness, and desire for connection. So securely attached adults are likely to offer and help and be more involved in an empathic, compassionate caregiving. This is the guy who's written most about this, Michelin. So going back to thinking about Porges's work, when we're feeling, again, I won't go into the controversy about Porges or not. I think basically a lot of this theory makes a lot of clinical sense, and we can argue about the evolutionary truth of some of it or not. But what we know is that in any moment, we are in an environment, we have a nervous system, and nervous system through what he calls neuroception is picking up whether it feels safe, and if it does, we can relax. If there's danger, we go into sympathetic nervous system responses. If there's really serious danger, we're going to shut down life-threatening responses. He describes it as the dorsal vagal system. But openness, really, in altruism, is very hard to do empathically induced altruism if we're not in this green zone. So in ambivalent attachment, which is those of you who haven't studied that much attachment theory, is, of course, it's the kind of more anxious, uncertain attachment style that you often see when you have an unpredictable parent. So ambivalent attachment is associated with more what we call hyperactivating styles, high levels of vigilance, and it's linked with more egotistical reasons for volunteering. So I might help people if I think other people are looking at me because I'm insecure and I want approval. I'm not really helping because I care. Incidentally, my personal theory is that many more of us therapists than we're prepared to admit grew up with ambivalent attachment styles as opposed to the secure ones we'd like to think we had. But what you see in highly avoidant attachment styles is in which you see a denial of attachment needs and a kind of compulsive self-reliance. In adults, and actually I think in kids as well, you see this style is associated with engaging in fewer voluntary activities, devoting less time to helping others, being less motivated by being altruistic. So there's something about early attachment experiences which might push us in certain directions in relation to being altruistic or not. And I think this makes a lot of sense. When we feel safe, when we feel secure, when somebody's empathizing with us, it's containing our anxieties, helping us make sense of things, it's helping us regulate ourselves, and we have good relationships, and the world generally feels good, then we're more open to connection and to trust, and we expect to be reached out to, but we also can reach out to others as well. And that actually in itself changes the nervous system. So this very simple bit of research found that parents, both fathers and mothers, who had what they call more mind-minded capacities, in other words, who could be in touch with their children's thoughts and feelings at 4 months, that predicted better heart rate variability at a year. And heart rate variability is linked with vagal tone. It's linked with what Porges and everybody talks about. And actually, mindfulness is also the best predictor we've got of emotional regulation, executive functioning skills, and actually of security of attachment. So these things all come together, I think, quite beautifully in a way, although here's another model that people often use. In fact, this was done for that book, The Good Life, and it's stolen from people like Porges and Pat Ogden. And actually, I'm never too sure about these heuristics. They're quite helpful, but they also, we have to be careful. They don't denote reality. They denote one way of trying to understand things. But what's true is that most of us would like to be in this window of tolerance more, where we have better heart rate variability, better engagement, social engagement system, where we have a deeper breathing, more relaxed, more empathy, more. And then when danger comes around the corner, we can't afford to be empathic. You know, if you're about to be attacked by a lion, then you're not interested in how they're feeling that day, or what, you know, what they're thinking, or if they've had a bad morning. You just got to survive. And so when you're in survival mode, it's much harder to be open and reach out to other people and connect. You have to contract and survive with whatever danger responses we need to get through the next few moments. And of course, that's even more the case if there's a kind of dorsal shutdown type of state. So a securely attached child is likely to show empathy in, say, a nursery when another child cries or is in trouble. And you do not see the same thing in insecurely attached kids. And kids who are very neglected or kids who are abused, etc., you just do not see the same levels of empathy or care for the other. So security, as I keep saying, breeds openness. And these qualities that people like Joan Halifax have talked about, she has the Upaya Zen Center and she has written a lot, as other people have, of, I think it's Brené Brown actually has popularized this idea of strong back, soft front, and wild heart, which I think is a lovely way to try to live our lives. If only we could, if only I could more. So again, the roots of prosocial behavior, as Nancy Eisenberg suggested, is in these very early experiences, that people who can regulate their emotions are less likely to be distressed. If I'm less distressed by your emotion and I can bear it, I'm more able to reach out towards it. So if I see somebody crying, I might find it overwhelming. I might try to shut them up or cross the road or hit them. Or if I can bear it and process it in myself, I might be able to reach out to it. So this, Eisenberg suggests, is the link between attachment, empathy, and self-regulation. And it also explains the link between antisocial personality type of problems, poor emotional regulation, executive function problems, etc. Why so many kids who come from backgrounds of trauma, for example, and violence, struggle to show empathy and they struggle to self-regulate. But all these things come together in a really interesting way, I think, in the research. So this is very simple. People probably know the mirror self-recognition test. Here's an example of it.
Looking for is clear evidence, clear signs of.
Basically, there's a bit of rouge on his face. If he looks in the mirror and touches his own face, it shows that he knows that the face in the mirror is his.
Seeing the face in the mirror and immediately moving the hand to touch the mark.
This girl, how old is she?
She's 22 months.
22 months. Once she had made eye contact, her mum Lisa put the mark on her face as instructed.
Show me your knees.
But she knows straight away. So she has whatever we mean by passed this mirror self-recognition test. So this very interesting study in Holland, about 125 kids around the age where this becomes more possible, around 15, 16 months. They did this rouge test, and some recognized themselves in the mirror and some didn't. And in all studies, not a single subject that showed concern and tried to help. So but basically the kids were all presented with another child in trouble in some way, a bit upset, but also had to do the rouge test. And all the kids who showed concern and tried to help were able to recognize themselves in the mirror. So there's a link between self-recognition, emotional self-recognition, if you like, and the wish to help others, which I think is really fascinating. So all the non-recognizers, the others who failed the mirror self-recognition test, showed a perplexed or indifferent response in the empathy test. And in fact, a few recognizers failed to show an empathic response, and then they did a further test and made the link between security of attachment. So they were much more likely to recognize themselves in the mirror and show empathy and compassion if they had a secure attachment style. This is the work of Bishop. I'd love to know if this has been replicated. It's so interesting. So just to, as we've got a dearth of football this weekend. Once it's outside. Okay, now I've got no justification for showing that. It's just except that I thought it was nice, and it does show something about being able to show empathy and regulate one's own emotions, and the link between those things. But one would bet that this little kid had a pretty good early life. So we mentioned earlier before the break some of this research around the prefrontal cortex, and although I'm wary of brain research which suggests this part of the brain does this and that part of the brain does that, and I do think that Lisa Feldman-Barrett's work is really important in this respect. We have to think about circuitries and complexities and different parts of the brain function in different ways in different cultures. What we do know is that trauma and abuse has a profound effect on the developing brain, and particularly these parts of the brain involved in self-regulation, in deferring gratification. And what we know is that it's also linked with security of attachment. So these things again come together, as Nancy Eisenberg found. And the kids who are able to defer gratification, for example, in this marshmallow test that I might show a few seconds of, were predicted in their adult life, in their 40s, were doing much better in a whole range of different ways. Better relationships, better careers, etc., etc. So these capacities are really, really important. So deferred gratification and altruism are linked. And I think we might say because they both entail thinking about one's minds and feelings, either your own or other people's. And they use the same brain regions that get knocked out of kilter, don't come online or go offline more quickly when there's been stress and trauma. Now, after that great big diatribe, let's just watch this for a few seconds. It's so delightful.
Marshmallow for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have two.
I don't think you ever see a better study, if you can see it enough, of self-deceptive defenses.
This feels really good.
Look, his hand is like out of his control. If I just smell it, is that really eating it? Okay, I'll stop. But you get the idea. So those capacities are really profoundly important, but they come from having had good attuned early experiences. And these parts of the brain that are central to emotional regulation are also central to our moral sense. And a lot of research that moral psychologists have done have been showing this stuff. So for example, you probably know the research of the runaway trolley. There's a kind of runaway sort of train on a train track. And so say you've got a train that's running away on a track, and in front of them, there's 5 workers who it's definitely going to kill. But also, you've got something you can pull, and you'll divert the train in this direction where there's only 1 worker. If you were here, if I could see you, I would say, how many of you would put your hands up? Just ask yourself, how many of you would pull the trigger, you pull the lever, so that the train would just kill the 1 worker as opposed to the 5? I think probably it's a bit of a debate. Some of you would, some of you wouldn't, some of you are uncertain. Then I ask a similar question, which is, got the same runaway train, same 5 workers. You're watching this time from a bridge. And next to you on the bridge is a very, very, very overweight person. And why that's important is because if you push them over the bridge, you will stop the train. So in a way, it's the same choice, one level, which is one person dies or 5 people die. But if I ask you, would you push him over or her over? Almost none of you, I think, would do it. And probably you're feeling more anxious now than when I asked the first question. So there's something about the parts of the brain involved in moral decisions are these prefrontal parts of the brain that are central to a link actually between these and areas like the amygdala, and they're central to moral decision making. And all the people who don't make those decisions would almost definitely be psychopaths, or possibly people who have damaged their prefrontal cortex. And you have to wonder whether trauma, they haven't done this research with trauma victims, but whether like kids who've been multiply abused, whether or not you'd have the same effect, which is that, so a psychopath would say, no, well, no brainer, chuck him over the bridge. And there's lots of research which backs up these sorts of things. And I think I'll leave that here now, but for now, but the idea is that actually, if our kind of emotional parts of our brains aren't working well, and they're not linking up with bodily parts, subcortical areas, particularly areas around the amygdala, that circuitry towards fear, etc., and emotional decision making, then we can't be quite so moral. And those things can get knocked out of kilter by bad experiences. And it's true of all of us, isn't it? So if we're stressed, you probably know, some of you might know a very old experiment from the 1970s where they put a dime in a phone booth in the old days when they used to have phone booths, and a dime wasn't very much money in the 70s. And they had an actor outside, or an actress, and when the people came out of the phone booth, whether they put a dime in or not, the actress dropped a sheaf of paper, and you went to see whether anybody would help pick up the paper. And I think that when there was a dime in the phone booth, there was something like 7 or 8 times more likely to help the actress. The dime wasn't very much money, but there was something about the world feeling good and enhancing generosity. And we all know that when we're feeling good, we tend to be more kind and more generous. In fact, you should have seen me this morning. I was on Hampstead Heath, and I'd fallen over, and a dog had jumped up on me and ruined my trousers, and I was rushing to get back, because otherwise I was going to be late for Niall. And then a friend of mine waved at me, and I just said, "Sorry, I haven't got time." So my generosity had completely disappeared because of my stress, and that's what's one of the things that stress does, of course. So when we're under threat or we're very stressed, our social engagement systems turn off, and we struggle to be empathic and altruistic, and we need to feel safe and, if possible, liked, loved, and appreciated to thrive, and then to be open to others. So it's all about connection. And maltreatment, we absolutely know, turns these capacities off. Right back to 1985, this work by Mary Main, abused kids showed almost no empathy for other children's distress in the nursery, and in fact could be quite nasty, give them another kicking, you know. Whereas we know that securely attached kids tend to play well and easily and more reciprocally with other kids in preschool, but there are more fights and conflicts with insecurely attached kids. And that's just, research bears this out time and time again. So, and, you know, having worked for decades, more than I'd care to admit to, with very traumatized kids and then adults, and now those who have become perpetrators, we should not be surprised how often these kids struggle. They struggle with relationships, they struggle with friendships, they struggle with fitting in. And again, the research is clear, the parts of the brain, people like Amy McCrory or Martin Tyker, whoever, the parts of the brain central to emotional regulation, to empathy, etc., particularly these prefrontal areas, are much less online after trauma and abuse. And again, it's no surprise then, is it? Prisons, psychiatric hospitals have a disproportionate number of people who have been in the care system, who suffer trauma. Trauma, abuse, and neglect make us less trusting, which is different to those who have more secure upbringings. So this is a kind of classic compassion mind three circle model. And what we know is that we need a balance between these systems. And again, these very overly simplistic heuristics can be useful as long as we don't take them for the truth. The world isn't actually divided into these 3 zones. But we might all think intuitively we have a kind of drive system driving us towards things, a soothing and connection system, and a threat and protection system when there's danger. And too many people are living in these two systems, particularly the red zone. And we need to try to cultivate this. We need to find ways of getting back to this. Living in the green zone wouldn't be a happy, healthy, exciting life, joyful life only, but we need to know it and be able to get there and then move from there to hear where there's exciting things and to hear where there's danger. And it's about getting that balance. So does what we do, does psychotherapy enhance altruism? Well, I've seen it time and time again in my clinical practice, but I've got no research evidence. They did this research with an 8-week mindfulness course where they gave some people an 8-week mindfulness course, and there was a control group. And the people had to come in to the office to do some questionnaires at the end. And in the office, they put 3 chairs, had 2 actors, and so 2 actors reading the newspaper, and then you had to come in, the people who doing the questionnaires had to come in and sit on a chair, and then somebody hobbles into the room on crutches, again an actor, and they saw who got off the chair to give up their chair to the person on crutches. They were much more likely to do so if they'd done the 8-week mindfulness course. So, and I suggest that actually that's what we see a lot in psychotherapy. That I see time and time again, kids, some of the nastiest people that I've worked with, really vicious and nasty to start with, and enjoying the pleasure of hurting other people, etc. And after several years of therapy, I'm afraid often something softens in them, something in their body softens. And one of the interesting things I see time and time again is that these little small acts of kindness begin to come into the therapeutic material. I remember one girl who really, she beat up her boyfriend, and then her girlfriend, she was bisexual. She had all kinds of, she was absolutely dismissive of anybody showing any empathy or anybody crying. She couldn't understand why there were tissues in the room. What fucking idiot, you know, that kind of thing. And by the end, she had softened such a lot that she started reporting, going to look after her brother's kids. And she even took an old man shopping, a neighbor shopping. She said, I hate the old git really, but she was doing it. There was acts of kindness coming in when people feel safer, more cared for themselves. And I see it in kids' play, where the play starts as violent, aggressive, nasty, everybody killing each other. And by the end of a therapy, often there are people helping each other, supporting each other with whatever they're using, toy animals or in their drawings. So what we know is empathy and altruism can develop with the right emotional environment. This is the work of Michael Tomasello in the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, classic altruism experiment.
Oh. Oh.
What's he going to do? Got to warm the cockles of your heart, isn't it?
So. Einmal hier und einmal. Oh.
Oh, yes.
Ja.
So what got me interested in this, and in fact this whole area was, I saw this research and I thought, blimey, almost none of the kids I work with do that. They don't show kindness to other people. And I even wrote to Michael Tomasello and said to Professor Tomasello, has there been any research done on the impact of attachment? I didn't know about the Bishop Collar work then. I don't think it had been done. Because the kids I work with don't do this. They don't show empathy and compassion and care. And he actually did very generously write back saying he didn't know. And what I'm suggesting, I suppose, in this talk is that these kids have had good enough early experiences to be able to reach out and help other people. I'll show one more.
So. Oh.
Pretty impressive given how bad the acting is. Now, this is another slightly similar a different experiment, 2 adults, psychologist and an interviewee, and they're either going to mimic, like in other words, bodily imitate the interviewee, or they're going to anti-mimic and see the results.
Now she's rubbing her
nose rubbing and a hair flip.
So
it's hard to hear, but you can see.
Oh, no,
scratch,
nose scratch.
Pretty
And
slow.
the flip.
And
Oh,
she
yeah,
does
yeah,
the
yeah,
flip. Yep.
yeah. Being mimicked not only makes most of her subjects feel better about the person doing the mimicking, but also makes them better persons themselves.
You guys can just follow me and we'll get started.
Oh.
In one of the experiments, for example, subjects were scored by how many pens they helped pick up after being mimicked. In other trials, the subject is purposely not mimicked.
So he's anti-mimicking.
Anti-mimicked.
People who are anti-mimicked, it's so disruptive to what the normal social interaction is supposed to be that we find that they have less self-control, less ability to regulate their behavior on a later task. So that's where they're eating more junk food, procrastinating more, and so on.
So he hasn't helped much. Now, I have no idea who the audience is. My guess is it will be more female than male. I need to tell you, it's not just because the second one was a bloke, but they did it on both genders, but it was because he was anti-mimicked, and the first one, there was a very clear imitation. And when somebody is following us in our bodily movements in a way which feels empathic, it makes us feel so much better and nicer, and that will then give rise to more altruism. So, and that's what you see, of course, in secure attachment. That's what you see in good attunement between a parent and a child. That's what you see in 2 good mates in the pub. You see a kind of mutual synchrony, which you can't see on Zoom. So one of the central themes that I'm talking about, I suppose, is synchrony and connection. And it's connection and that gives rise to cooperation and linking, which is central and has to come from safeness, and that gives rise to altruism. And without that, we have atomization, splitting, etc., a very, very different way of being. And we know this from really, really, really early. So, for example, this research shows that mothers and babies, there's a synchronization of their brain signals as they gaze at each other, assuming this is a good relationship. So the neuronal activity of 2 people communicating, this is also true to adults, synchronizes. The brain activity synchronizes in order to allow, so this is very embarrassing, the phone's gone off. In order to allow for a connection between both subjects. So it's inter-brain communication. And there's so much, and it could be bodily communications we saw in the last one, brain communication as we see in this experiment. So one of the things that we've learned, if we've learned anything about psychotherapy research over decades and decades, it is that the therapeutic alliance is still the best predictor we've got of good therapeutic outcomes. And this research, and I hope it's been taken forward because it's 2016, and so it's maybe a bit out of date. What they found was that during psychotherapy, patient and therapist tended to spontaneously synchronize their vocal pitch, bodily movements, and even their physiological processes if there was a good therapeutic alliance. So the alliance is grounded in the coupling of the patient and therapist brains. So synchrony helps to establish inter-brain coupling, which you see in all kinds of contexts. You see it when you're with your mates and you're having a good time together. You see it in kids. You see it if you're singing in a choir. You see it even if you're singing a song at a football match, dare I say. You see it where its closeness and cooperation gives rise to the wish to reach out and care for other people. And actually in these psychotherapy studies, this is another study, but they also found heart rate synchrony between client and therapist was observed as there were moments of meeting. And any of you out there want to do PhDs, I think this is a fascinating subject to do some research on. So these are 14-month-olds. The experiment, I think, is self-explanatory.
The experimenter stands across from the infant and music plays over the loudspeakers.
The assistant bounces the infant to the beat of the song, and the experimenter facing the infant also bounces, either in synchrony with how the baby is bounced, or out of synchrony, for example at a faster or slower tempo. Subsequently, we measured the infant's helpfulness towards the experimenter. In each trial, the experimenter would accidentally drop the object she needed to complete the task, and the infant was given 30 seconds to respond. We found that infants who had been bounced in synchrony with the experimenter were significantly more likely to assist with the dropped items and to help early in the trials.
Isn't that amazing? So being synchronized with, which we might link with attunement, made you more likely to help another person afterwards. It's extraordinary, really. So connection, closeness, synchrony gives rise to an outward form of social engagement, as Borges would say, and a wish to reach out. So it's all about safeness and connection. So this is a good Christmas message, guys, really, isn't it? So being helpful, reaching out, being open, helping other people is actually going to make us feel better as well, but that's not why we do it. Of course, we feel better when we give to charity and we volunteer. Interestingly, money makes us happy much more so if we give it to other people rather than keep more for ourselves. Also, helping others makes us feel healthier. And there's a clear link between how much community volunteer activity and that kind of thing people do and psychological and physical health benefits. In fact, being helpful, like volunteering, it reduces all kinds of psychiatric diseases. There's been research on that, and also reduces mortality rates. Again, it's old research. I'm sure there's more recent research. So the model I've been talking about really is a model of human nature, of social and emotional development, which assumes an inbuilt human propensity for connection from birth onwards. What we know is the babies from the first moments of life, they're looking for connection. They're reaching out, they're looking for the mother's eyes. They've got a choice between the mother's eyes and the breast. They tend to go for the eyes first. They want contact, they want connection. It's what soothes us and makes us feel good. Trevathan calls this having a companion in meaning making, which I think is a really good metaphor. We all need companions in meaning making. Bratton describes infants being born what he calls ultracentric, which was to counter Piaget's idea of the egocentric infant. And Robert Emdy, who died recently, sadly, said he described a we-go rather than ego. And what the suggestion is that selfishness vies with cooperativeness and can become exaggerated at times of stress and tension, which might be the case in the world that we currently live in. So Matt Ridley said, our minds have been built by selfish genes, but they've been built to be social, trustworthy, and cooperative. So selfish versus cooperative genes, we have both. We're capable of shocking cruelty, viciousness, and aggression, as many survivors of abuse know. And we can't afford not to face that, stare evil in the eyes, we said, but we're also born primed with an inbuilt capacity for altruism and to fit into a moral and rule-bound social universe. Can't read this, it's hidden behind the camera. So this is a very different view from the Hobbesian social world. So here's a nice little clip of birds they'll hum into each other's rhythms.
For a long time, biologists were puzzled by this behavior.
So that's what happens when you spend time with somebody you like. You move into each other's rhythms and you synchronize at a bodily, I think probably at a cellular level.
If you're wondering how it could be possible, we're so used to choreography giving rise to synchrony. These creatures are not choreographed, they're choreographing themselves. Now all this changes when a predator enters the scene.
This is the key message in a way. Danger gives rise to atomization and separation and losing connection.
Here on the model, you see the predator attacking. The prey move out in random directions, and then the rule of attraction brings them back together again. So there's this constant splitting and reforming.
Okay, so it's been a central theme of what I've been talking about, really. And what we know is that life is absolutely made up of all kinds of different connections. We know about mycelium networks and fungal networks under the ground, how trees communicate. We know, this is a picture of a mimosa on the right. We know that even the mimosa contracts and turns in the face of danger. Talked about the cell danger response. We know that there's closing down and atomization in this danger, and there's opening and reaching out when the world feels safe. And we're, I think, in this room probably on the side of safeness, communication, cooperation, and trying to create that kind of better world. So the cell danger response, which is one of the things I started with, will arise right down at a cellular mitochondrial level when there's danger, again, fungus, a virus like COVID or whatever. And long COVID is often a result of this kind of thing. But it gives rise to danger at cellular level, but also at psychological level and at a social level. We see atomization, individualism, neoliberalism, which in themselves create things like loneliness and ill health and kills off generosity and kindness. And it's interesting because I can see myself in the corner of the screen, and I'm noticing that I'm folding my arms much more than I would normally when I'm giving a talk, when I try to be a bit more open. I think there's something about not having the social connection that makes me more kind of insular, if you like. And it's interesting to think about what insular means. I just looked it up in the dictionary before and pasted it in here. With, words like closed, inward-looking, prejudiced, separated, separate, contracted, confined, isolated. That's not the world I want to live in, primarily. So it also has a link with talking about generosity. Somebody's just brought me up a cup of coffee, so I'm gonna just accept it as we talk. So this is thank you. So this is a quote from a Native American leader whose name I can't pronounce. I never heard it said. Matinaquat. It's clear that the way to heal society of its violence and lack of love is to replace the pyramid of domination with a circle of equality and respect. Actually, so beautiful. And above is a little picture from the work of, I think this is Richard Wilkinson actually, but the people like Michael Marmot and Richard Wilkinson have shown so clearly how inequality and poverty give rise to all kinds of social ills, more adversity, less trust, more illness, etc. Again, this is not the world that we want to create. So guys, I've got about 2 or 3 slides left, I think, and then we're going to have questions. So this one, I can't see you, but I'm going to have to take it on trust that you're going to be joining in with this asynchronous pendulum that becomes a pendulum. Nearly done. So just imagine we're all in harmony in this room now for a moment. Our brain waves synchronizing, our heart waves synchronizing, and how different the world would feel. Okay, so moving to just about the last slide, I think. This is a quote from somebody called Carol Gilligan, who's a great feminist and who's married to somebody who actually did a lot of research with forensic patients, perpetrators. And if you forgive the word psychoanalysis and change it to psychotherapy or anything kind, generally, more than ever, we need psychoanalysis with its method of free association to undo the associations that currently threaten not only our happiness, but also our survival. But we need a psychoanalysis, psychotherapy free from its truncated Oedipus story, a psychoanalysis that recognizes trauma, not nature, as a force that turns love incestuous and anger murderous. Psychoanalysis that is at once psychological and political, and that encourages us to take the risk of opting, and it is a risk of opting for love and freedom. There's another philosopher I really love, actually, Charlie Brown. Finish on that one. Charlie Brown says that we're put here on earth to make others happy. No, I can't read this. It's got a thing in the way. Is that why we're here? I guess I'd better start doing a better job. I'd hate to be shipped back. So that's the end of my formal talk. Here are some contact details, and I'm going to send out a PDF with these on. So there's a sign up for a newsletter, which I'll send out, which will have a blog and a free paper to download on it. Here's my website. That's my email, that's a website, that's a Twitter, occasionally do that. Here is a link to a book funnel link, which again should be on there. And if you click on that, you will be able to download a free paper that I wrote for the Child Psychotherapy Journal some years ago about altruism and trauma. There's a LinkedIn, which I occasionally do. Here's some of my books, and here's the new one. So this is about narcissism, not altruism, showing you my books. But this is the new one that actually as Niall said, only the Kindle version currently is on pre-order, but the paper version will be on pre-order any day now, I really hope. And I think at that point, I think I will stop sharing and we come into the room. Am I right now?
Hi, Graham. Yep, that was a fantastic presentation. Thank you very much. And yeah, it was one of our most entertaining I think we've had so far. So great job. So we've had a few questions here. Anybody else?
Should I stop sharing, by the way?
Yeah, feel free to. Yeah, we've had quite a few questions in the Q&A section. So I'm just going to invite people into the room to ask some of these questions. So our first one is going to be from Paula, I think. So I'm just going to invite Paula in here now. 2 seconds.
Do you actually see a person?
We can allow them to talk, but I'm not sure if we can show the microphone or show the camera. Let's see how this goes.
Hi, it's Paula here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Not see me, maybe. Graham, thank you so much. It really was entertaining, but very heartwarming to hear all that research. My question was at the very start, and I was wondering whether altruism can be instinctive. Because I remember years and years ago, I did a very altruistic act to a stranger when I was then placed in danger. But it felt like a no-brainer, and it felt like I didn't actually have a choice. I literally just leapt into action. So I wondered if it could be an instinctive thing.
Yeah, well, I think it depends on what we mean by instinctive, but I suspect it was with you, and I suspect it probably was with that, whoever it was, that looks like an Algerian man climbing up in that housing estate. But I also worked with people who have instinctively done some pretty nasty things. And so whether it's instinctive in terms of innate, or whether it's how our personality is developed because of some things that we've experienced, like reasonably good parenting and friendships and that kind of thing. So I wouldn't say it's a biological, I think there's a biological propensity to have that instinctual reaction, but it could get turned off by bad experiences and turned on by good experiences, is, I suppose, the thesis that I'm trying to suggest.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paula. Okay, so next question is from Leonie. So Leonie, I'm gonna invite you in now. And Paula, if you maybe want to mute your microphone, thanks.
Hello, I have 2 questions. Obviously, the experiments that you had, do you think, although the child will have an attachment to the adult that's obviously in the room, if it was behind a screen, do you think the child would make a different choice to what it does in the experiment?
Leonie, which experiment were you referring to?
Well, obviously, most of the experiments that had the child in would have some adult present. So not the person doing the experiment, but just the carer.
Okay, so there are different kinds of experiments. So the altruism experiments, where the toddlers were say, picking up something that a bloke had dropped.
Yes.
I think they did have a parent in the room, and I think for ethical reasons that probably was necessary. But I didn't get the impression, and I think they might even have screened this out, to be honest, in terms of that they were doing it because they wanted approval. In a way, the parents were told to be really still and not give any indication of what the kids should do or not. And so there was something, again, going back to was it Paula previously, is that something instinctive almost, like they couldn't help themselves but do it. In the other ones, when the babies were choosing between the dolls, the experimenters who brought out the dolls didn't know which was the goodie and the baddie. They hadn't watched the experiments. So they screened out a lot of stuff. Interestingly, the Michael Tomasello experiments, the altruistic toddlers, they found something really fascinating, which didn't quite fit into the talk. But what they found was that when they gave these kids rewards, and I hope that some health and social services managers who are watching this, and business managers, when they rewarded these kids for being altruistic by giving them, I don't know, a nice toy or a shiny star or something like that, they didn't do it the second or the third time. So it was the act of being altruistic which was rewarding rather than getting an extrinsic reward. So it's intrinsic reward rather than extrinsic reward that was the driver. That's not quite answering your questions, but I don't think, if your question was, were they getting, I mean, the other thing is, if a parent wasn't in the room and they were on their own, they might be too anxious, a bit like what we see in the strange situation test. When you're on your own, that might trigger stress, which might then make you less likely to be altruistic, I suppose.
Yes. Okay, that does answer the question. Obviously, those thoughts had gone through my mind when obviously I asked it, but maybe it'd be interesting to find out what those reactions would be.
Yeah, so there's a good little doctoral research study for you to get on with.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Leonie. Okay, so next question then from Charles Gordon Graham. So Charles, I'm just going to turn on your microphone here now.
Not quite on my...
You're muted, Charles.
Sorry. Oh, hi. Okay, I've unmuted. Sorry. Hi, thank you. Really interesting talk. Really enjoyed it. I've got a question. Just wonder if you, I mean, I'll put it in the chat, but when earlier you were talking about difference, let's say one, may show more empathy towards those who are more similar.
Yeah.
Like, for example, race, class, I suppose maybe education level, whatever. I'm also wondering, though, looking beyond that to species and the whole question about altruism, altruistic attitudes towards other species. I wonder if you could say something about that.
Well, I'm not an expert on that by any means. I don't know. I do know that some of the most popular, I don't know, Facebook and Instagram and posts are of, tigers cuddling up with other species, and those sorts of things. And that, are you talking species to species rather than human to other species?
Both. Actually, I'm thinking of both.
Okay, but I think we love them because in a way they're unexpected. And what we know is that if you're a deer or whatever, an impala in the South African bush, probably you shouldn't try too hard to cuddle up to a leopard. So these things are complicated. I think it's interesting. I don't know what gives rise to this. I think obviously some species like dogs have evolved to be very, very, very attuned to human bodily and emotional states and vice versa. That's what they've evolved to do. So that just comes completely naturally, if you like, after all that evolution. Whether that's the case with fox, I still get a bit fearful when I see the brazen foxes in my street, for example. So I don't feel that much empathy for it. I don't know actually, but I think that it's the same predisposition which comes from the wish to look after, and it helps if you've got. So you remember when there's a lot of seal culling, people were absolutely outraged by it because baby seals have these big eyes that are like babies' eyes. Whether they would feel the same if it was rodents, I don't know. so what draws us to feel empathy? But I'm really speculating and out of my comfort zone here. But what would lead us to show empathy and altruism to one species as opposed to another? I don't know.
Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Thanks, Charles. Okay, next is Amy Aaron with her question.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. Thanks for your talk today. It's been really, really interesting. And I think my question was probably quite long-winded. It just kind of, the thought occurred to me when you were talking about the the train track dilemma, and you were talking about how you know, obviously if you were actually being asked, you know, to push someone to basically kill someone to save more people, if you had empathy, that would be a very difficult decision to make. And as you were saying, you know, for someone to make that decision very quickly and not really think about it, they might have to be psychopathic or and it just popped into my head that, you know, I'm wondering if there might be other factors that could influence something like that as well. If there were any studies on maybe other individual differences, personality traits. Obviously psychopathy comes into it, but if there were any other kind of individual differences that can affect decision making with those kind of scenarios.
Just before I attempt in an unwieldy way to answer it, clumsy way to answer it, what do you have any speculations about personality traits that might?
I mean, I'd assume if you're highly neurotic, you're probably going to just be going back and forth, hesitating, getting very anxious, and you probably would struggle to make any kind of prompt decision. Whereas if you're not so neurotic, you'd probably be able to think it through in a more calmer way. So that would probably influence how quickly you react, or if, you know, if I don't know. I'm trying to think what
it's
other.
Really interesting. I really don't know. Again, it's another fantastic study to do. But so, for example, some other guys who've researched things like, let me tell you two other experiments that I didn't get to. One was, again, it was with, so a kind of classic example, you're on a boat, there's 120 people on the boat smashes against the rocks, smashes to smithereens, there's one lifeboat, you're the captain, the lifeboat can only take 20 people safely, 50 people cram onto it. What are you going to do? Are you going to get rid of 30 people, or are you going to leave them there? Now, when you ask most of us, we think about it for 3 or 4 minutes, debate either way. It's really excruciating decisions. We could come down on one side or the other. If you ask a psychopath, it's a no-brainer. Get them off, you know. And they might be right, but but they don't have the emotional dilemmas that most of us do. So whether it's good to be neurotic in certain circumstances, whether it's good to be a psych, to be quite honest, if I had an undetonated bomb outside my front door, I prefer a psychopath who's very good at it to do it than somebody who's very neurotic and anxious. So there are times when we need those traits. Antonio Damasio did a brilliant experiment, something he called the Iowa gambling experiment, where he gave people this game which had set steps in it, and there were 4 packs of cards. 2 cards were ordinary packs of cards, and 2 cards were stacked so that they would pay out loads of money to begin with in this gambling game, and then you'd lose loads of money. If you're still with me, and then if I can't see you, but you have to take it, and then what happened was the people, after a little while, they thought all the packs were the same, but when they reached for the packs which were stacked to pay and then lose loads of money, if they measured their heart rate or their galvanic skin conductance, in other words, sweating, as they reached out towards the packs that were paying out loads of money and then losing loads of money, their heart rates went up and their skin conductance went up, galvanic skin response went up as well. So their body knew there was a problem here. Now, in Damasio's experiments, 2 groups of people didn't have that response. If I could see you, I would ask what you thought. But actually, in Damasio's research, one group were people who had organic damage to their prefrontal cortex, they might be, had a head injury. And the other group were psychopaths who had less link between subcortical areas like the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. And my speculation would be that if you've suffered more trauma, similarly, you might be more, you might be less able to self-regulate. Again, I'm not quite answering your question, Amy, but I think it's complicated. And at what point? So one of the classic moral dilemmas was I think there was a film about it and a book about it called Sophie's Choice. So you're hiding from the Nazis or someone, and you're in a basement flat, and there's 12 people in the flat, or 12 people in the basement. You know that if the Nazis find you, they'll kill you all. And you've got a baby, your baby, and your baby starts to cry. And you know that if the baby continues to cry, you'll be found and everybody will be killed. Do you strangle or kill your own baby? I bet nobody here would say yes, but it's a kind of a classic, excruciating moral dilemma. What kind of personality would kill their own baby to save 12? Which of us could do it? I don't know. So these complicated issues, really.
Thanks for answering that. I think it just, in my head, I sort of thought, it didn't sound, in my head, it felt very simple to say, oh, psychopaths would do this and others wouldn't. When I guess I know of more than one person who I don't consider psychopaths who would probably quite easily say, obviously, I would do that. Maybe they're more psychopathic than I think, but they seem very unpsychopathic in other ways.
If you believe in the left-right hemisphere thing, it might be they're more left hemisphere dominant, they're more logical, more cognitive, less emotionally in touch for other reasons. You don't have to be a psychopath to be less emotionally in touch. So yeah, sure.
Thank you, Amy, and thanks for that horrible moral dilemma that you've just given us.
Sorry, that ruined people's morning.
Okay, next one is from Penny Stewart. So Stuart, or Penny, I'm just going to invite you into the room now.
Hi, Penny, a familiar name. You're muted.
Penny, are you there? We might go to the next one then. In that case, we've got a couple here from Danny. So Danny, I'm just going to invite you in now.
By the way, I just seen a brilliant answer in the chat. The only chat. If you made the baby unconscious, that I think that's cheating, but it's a good answer. Okay, Danny.
Hello. Okay, well, I've had a couple of questions, and firstly, yeah, I've really enjoyed the talk, and especially the comment on the bad acting. I wanted to actually, if I could just comment on, I found it a really interesting question that Charles asked about other species, because obviously there would be an outgroup and all sorts of implications. But what I've noticed, both for being kind between species and generally being kind and altruistic, after having studied this a lot, is that I think it's really key that basic needs are met. And if you have the sort of prosperous, safe society like we have, but also what animals have in captivity, they can actually really be tolerant and kind to other species. But as soon as their basic needs kick in, say they didn't have anything to eat, the cheetah would quickly eat the gazelle, presumably. So it needs a certain environment, which isn't always, or is rarely exists in nature. But sorry to be cheeky and say all this. I'm just going to come to my questions. I was interested in gender biases in altruistic behavior, because you referred briefly to this when talking about the mirroring experiments. And that's quite a thorny, big question. And the other one was, I'm very interested in the genetic differences in oxytocin receptors. So if you don't have time to answer both, just pick one.
Okay.
Please, Graham.
I'm very tempted to shirk both of them, because they're both so. First of all, I don't know enough about the oxytocin receptors, other than obviously that it looks like females have more, but there might well be cultural differences. So it might well be in some cultures, or some biological females, or might have more oxytocin receptors than others, and it might be linked with nurturing. But my guess is, so one of the great things about Sarah Bluffer-Hurdy's ideas about us being a cooperative breeding species is that every one of us, including males, have got the capacity to care for infants, including strange infants, and parts of the brain light up which are involved in reward when you see a strange baby, not just our own baby. And they don't light up when you see a strange adult. And that the more contact you have with an infant, and the more if you're not got too much trauma and stress in your own background, then actually the more you develop these capacities to parent and care, my guess would be that in that process, more oxytocin receptors would develop and a whole range of different neurochemical and nervous system and brain systems would be firing up in such a way that it wouldn't mean that males couldn't do it. Pretty similar, you know, obviously some things that males can't do. Like there's a lot of oxytocin gets released in breastfeeding. Unless you have hormone treatment, you're never going to be able to do that as a bloke. But nonetheless, I suppose what I'm saying, I'm standing on the fence, but saying, let's not assume that males biologically can't care as much as females. And a lot of it is culture, and a lot of it is, in fact, Herdy would suggest a lot of it is just default. You know, I happen to be breastfeeding, so I'm the one who's doing the caring, and then I get, and you just go down this pathway. I'm not sure if that's really answered the question. So there is an idea that, you know, if males have more testosterone, testosterone seems to work against oxytocin, and it's linked with more aggression and less kindness and caring. And of course, biological fathers who are living with their pregnant partners at the time by birth, they have lower testosterone than they did before the pregnancy. So there are all these complex biological systems, and I don't think are set in stone. You know, you develop more testosterone, so men release more. When Obama won the election, was it Obama? Anyway, if your presidential candidate won the election, you'll have a higher testosterone than if you supported the losing candidate. So these are really complicated things. It's not, they're not just written in stone. What was the other question?
Well, I like how you've actually answered both questions in one.
Oh, good,
way, you know, because you've referred to genetics and oxytocin and gender. I like that, yeah. Well, I'm particularly interested because I totally agree that you can really change, that we influence each other, and through experiences like child rearing or maybe being a therapist or counselor, which I am, that I definitely feel I've become more empathic, and because I actually have the quite extreme combination of having both of the double gene that lessens your oxytocin response. So I'm actually, you know, I don't know if you know much about this, but I'm particularly interested because it affects me. So I am technically one of those not so empathic people, but I have both through a personal relationship and my work become more empathic, but I have noticed this effect of the oxytocin on my social life, definitely. So it's just really fascinating, you know, but I sort of would agree that, and also I think we have to remember the individual differences. I think some males are very empathic and other males are not, but so we're obviously talking about an average there when we talk about gender differences.
Thanks, Danny, really appreciate that. And I think you're right, we are talking about an average, but also the day in part is about nature and nurture, and that's exactly what you're asking about. And there are not very, very clear answers, but I would err on the side of nurture being underrated in our current culture.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Danny.
Thank you.
Thanks, Graham, as well. So the next one is from Alistair. So Alistair, I'm just going to invite you in now.
Okay, hello.
Hi.
Hi, I've really got maybe two questions if there's time. But first of all, you're probably aware of the work on communicative musicality by Trewarthen and others. Given your own name, do you have thoughts about the role of music in our connectedness?
Yes. I was so ashamed of my name when I was a kid. I couldn't do anything musical, and I just hid in the corner all the time. But there's something about the musicality of, so actually any good communication has got musicality in it, hasn't it? Good mother-infant, father-infant communication, they call it parentese these days, they used to call it motherese. It's got prosody, it's got rhythm, it's got life. It's that people who we worry about are often very shut down, they have less musicality in their very beings, less rhythm in their beings. So absolutely, and what we know is that people sing in choirs together, actually they have heightened oxytocin, they have lower cortisol, their brains synchronized, the whole range of different extraordinary things. I'm a great fan of music and music therapy and all of those things, yeah.
Okay, thanks. I mean, that obviously could be developed further. Just on the last subject, thinking of nature versus nurture, I was going to ask the question, is altruism instinctive or learned, or perhaps the instinct is triggered and reinforced by attachment and attunement?
Such a big question, isn't it? So I think we're born with a natural predisposition but that can get closed down by stress, tension, anxiety, trauma, etc. I also think that we have to be helped to develop the capacity to manage emotional triggers. So there was a classic study going back to, was it Danny who asked about gender? Somebody asked about gender. There's a classic study years ago where they put boys and girls in a room, separately in a room with a crying doll, I think it was. And the girls were all empathic and kind to the dolls, and the boys picked them up and chucked them out the room and kicked them and things like that. Now, again, I don't think this was biological. I think it's already cultural. These weren't that young. They were probably early primary school age or late toddler. But what was interesting was when they measured the heart rates of the boys and their kind of physiological reactions, they were much higher. In other words, they were much more triggered than the girls. So because they couldn't bear and stand the emotional distress of being in the presence of other people's distress, they reacted aggressively and unempathically. So our job is, in a way, to try to help people manage the emotional distress, be with it in themselves and in order for them to be with it in other people, which is kind of 101 of counseling and mindfulness and all of these things.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, I was thinking about even mimetic theory, to what extent we're governed even unconsciously by the modeling of others and our disposition to copy others.
Okay, so just really quickly, because I know we're running out of time and I'm speaking faster. But it's mimesis is it's a superficial mimicking, if you like, often, but it's also how we can kind of learn how to be like other people. It's absolutely essential part of learning for kids, learning to identify with their adults, whatever kind of adults they're with. The thing is, mimesis is linked with cooperation and connection. And if I'm scared, I stop the process of mimesis and I turn in on myself and I contract, and it's the atomization. So safeness must precede that, I think.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alistair. Thank you, everybody, for your questions as well. And thank you so much, Graham, for a brilliant presentation. And just your insights today have been really, really helpful. So before you go, is there anywhere you'd like to send people online? Any sort of requests of the audience? What's your any sort of final words?
Have a really good, relaxing Christmas. Give yourself some kindness and nice times, and that will allow us all to be nicer and kinder to other people, which will make us feel healthier and better and happier. That probably wasn't what you're asking now, but in fact, I've just finished writing a blog this morning, which is very sad, having already written a blog and been to the Heath before I even came here, about the process of closing down and shutting down, and the difference between hibernating in winter as a healthy thing or shutting down as a defensive thing, which will be on my website. But so were you asking if I should send anything out, or what were you, sorry, I think.
Just anywhere you'd like people to go online, or any sort of, a bit of advice at the end. And I suppose you've already given a bit of advice for Christmas. So anything else?
Not really, just follow no, not really. Keep breathing, guys. And I will have a look at the links that I send out, if that's all right. And other than that, enjoy the rest of the day. And I'm very impressed you're doing this the Sunday before Christmas, just about. So good for you. Okay, thanks very much, Niall, for being a great host. And thank you, everybody.
No worries. Thank you very much, Graham. Everybody else, we're back at 1 o'clock with our next talk from Dr. Hannah Critchlow. Now that's going to be on Demio, not on Zoom. So you're going to receive a join link about 15 minutes before. So we'll do that one on Demio. So I'll see you guys then. Have a great lunch. And Graham, thanks again. See you guys soon.
Bye.